Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Vanu Deschetti. I'm the founder and CEO of EVA Event Tech Hub. Welcome to the webinar series. Before I introduce you to our awesome guest today, go through a little bit of a housekeeping. If you've joined our webinars before, you know the drill. If you're new, this is for you. So we love doing these webinars, purely educational. And one of the things that I've loved as being as a meeting planner is learning through others and sharing what I've learned along the way as well. And I've got great mentors and great partners that I've worked with in the past, and I'm happy to bring them here to our webinar series so they can share the same. Now, this webinar it specifically does qualify for a 1 CE credit for if you have CAE, CMP, or CEM. But the only catch is you have to watch it live. So those that are going to watch this as a recorded session, sorry, but I hope that there's going to be great value in today's session. Also want to introduce Gil Gonzalez. He's behind the scenes, our event tech today. He's EVA's event director. And so we're in good hands. But if you have any trouble today with using anything on Zoom, he's there for you to tap into and he can help you out. Today, as with all of our webinars, we love questions. We love hearing from you. So definitely use the chat box. Let's hear from you. You can put your questions there or in the Q&A. I'll make sure that we try to interject those as we go along. Okay, let's see here. So let's just get started. Before I introduce our guests, I do want to put a poll out there so you guys can take this poll while I introduce the guests. So Gil, if you can launch that poll and let everybody look. Last week, I actually put this poll on LinkedIn, but I wanted to see with everyone that's joining us today, what your concerns are. If when you're planning a hybrid event, what are your biggest concerns? AV costs, internal staff. So we'll leave that poll right there for you guys to participate in. In the meantime, let me introduce, well, today's session is all about, and I think I hope you're in the right session. We're here to talk about hybrid events in AV production. There's a lot going around on it. It keeps evolving, changing. How do we keep up with it? And we've got two awesome guests. Anka Trifan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And then we also have Chuck Crosswhite with Falcon Events.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. So these two individuals are experts in the industry. They've had boots on the ground. They've walked the talk. They've done everything from bringing in the AV equipment to helping create run of shows to actually producing these live events. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about today. But let's start from the basic. Hybrid, the meaning of hybrid has really changed over time. And I know both of you have done hybrid even before the pandemic. So maybe Chuck, let's start with you. In terms of hybrid, what does it mean to you? How do you think it's changed over time?
Well, I think when there's a big difference between what people consider hybrid and what I consider virtual. And I think during the pandemic, what we were actually producing is what I would call virtual events. And the thing that has changed is the interactions, is the integrations that we've developed since then, right? So how we engage the audience, how we engage our participants is really, it's much more, sophisticated now than I would say what we were doing during the pandemic and pre-pandemic. It's not just a live stream anymore. This is a hybrid event with very specific engagements and interactions.
And then Anka, how about you? You've seen some changes in the industry as well. How do you see it, or how do you think people should be defining hybrid events?
I think the idea of hybrid events has definitely been around for a long while, practically since live streaming technology was first introduced. And by definition, hybrid events are called a mixture of virtual and live elements. In my opinion, however, probably I'm going against the grain, but there's two different definitions when it comes to that. One is the fantastical definition, and one is the real life boots on the ground definition of what that looks like. And the fantastical, I mean, it's great. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not something that we should all aspire to. It's definitely, the type of event in which we have have, platform that's been well thought out. The timelines are somewhat different. The digital sessions are maybe shorter. The networking opportunities are there. They're intertwined with just amazing experiences for attendees. There's just true balancing and integration that's happening between your virtual audience that is equally treated as your in-person audience, and they're connecting with each other, and they're happy, and they're engaging in, somewhat of an equal measure. The event is entertaining and catering to basically the needs of not just the live in-person audience, but also the virtual audience. And it's creating memorable event experiences that we all want to be partaking in on both sides of the camera. And there's maybe even like 3D metaverse elements embedded in it. I mean, come on, if we're going to dream big, why not do that? And if budget is not an issue, why not go in that direction? But then there's also this real life boots on the ground where budgets do exist, where shortage in qualified labor is a real thing, where past ROI directly linked to this proper balanced integrated virtual component to your in-person event is a thing, and is maybe not as high as you planned for, expected, projected, whatever the case might be. So I might be going against the grain and what Chuck said, but in the real world that I'm in, what I see happening is the majority of hybrid events, and again, with the disclosure that a lot of the events that I do have an educational type of element, and they're corporate, but they're more than happy to include that streaming component or recording of the event and call it hybrid, so that they can, the audience can partake in the event either from their home and only engage with the platform for Q&A, live Q&A, or maybe just for some networking opportunities. But the majority of the events, that's the current reality, because and event platforms do function like a glorified agenda in many cases, right? And it's a way for remote audiences to connect with the sessions, maybe have access to some exclusive content. But streaming is really the component that makes that event now hybrid versus just an in-person.
I think, well, before I get into that, let's go to the poll, because we've got some great feedback in. So thank you, Gil, for sharing that. So it's in line with what we found on LinkedIn. And Gil, if you can actually share what we saw on LinkedIn as well, it's AV costs. And I think that's not surprising, right? That was a concern that is always with us, even with live events. And of course, it's not going to go away. And then with Anka, you mentioned labor shortages and just supply shortages. Yeah. It's a real issue. So for those of you that are right there, you're not alone. It is something that the industry, you're not making it up. You actually literally are feeling it. So hopefully that was helpful for you all to kind of realize, and also helped us with this conversation and why we've honed in on the AV conversation. What I find interesting about the hybrid is that we've gone from, it was a, pre-pandemic, some people were doing it. Pandemic almost made it a necessity. And then it seemed like there for a little while at the pandemic, it was kind of like, well, we really want to be back in person, so let's try to avoid it. But now after things have calmed down, people are thinking about hybrid again. So Anka, what would you say to people, if they're thinking about it, their hesitation, what would be the one thing you would tell them? Like, get over the hesitation because you can get X out of it.
You're very right about the several, event cycles that we certainly went through, just in the last few years alone, right? I feel like there's this new concept of what an event is, just because of the pandemic. And now post-COVID, pre-recession, we have this new herald, that is happening. And a lot of people, what I'm seeing, especially in 2023, they're putting the brakes on, right? Like while we had 2022 be like full steam ahead, especially second part of the year, this year feels like a lot of people are sort of like putting the brakes on, or they're pushing forward and let's see what happens, and then we'll cut our losses. I think there's definitely a benefit to consider the the virtual element to your in-person event as still being something that you should integrate in your strategy. Because personally, you know, I I do tend to join in-person industry events that are interesting to me for a number of reasons, but the number that I attend today versus the number I used to attend before is very, very small, because I just don't want to be on the road so much anymore. I want to be more mindful of how I spend my time, of my mental health and my mental fitness. Like, where does my time go? And is that even worth taking me out of the office for several days on travel, dealing with, you know, airplane, and travel hasn't been that great, you know, with cancellations either. So having the option to join a virtual event, I'll take that over any of the in-person, unless the in-person has such an experience that is so captivating, or it has the type of networking that I'm looking forward to, or I just want to escape my family for, I don't know, a couple of days and I need to go out.
No, Chuck, you just came back from traveling from Buenos Aires for work, and you know you're working with clients as well. You know, what are your clients saying to you about like virtual and hybrid? How are they making that decision, or what are you counseling them on?
Well, I think the clients are coming from a portion sometimes of just making sure accessibility and inclusion are, you know, a part of the event, right? They don't want to leave anyone out that may want to participate, that may want to contribute. So they're making sure that they have, you know, their event is open for anyone to join that they might want to invite or, you know, partake in the actual conference. So I'm seeing a lot of that. I think a lot of the sentiments that Anka shared earlier are widespread. There's a lot of people that may not want to come to your event, but if they can do it from home, they would love to participate. They would love to be engaged. They might want to be with their family. They might have something keeping them away from the live event space, but they don't want to feel left behind. And so I'm feeling that sentiment from the clients, is making sure that we have the hybrid elements to create this accessible and you know, all-inclusive conference for everyone. So I think it's really important. I think a lot of people see that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of word out there. I think a lot of, and why we have this webinar today is that there's a lot of kind of misconceptions or past experiences that drive our wantingness to do hybrid events and with AV costs. What are, Anka, maybe you can start off with us here. You know, what is probably the biggest myth that you hear about AV production costs as it relates to hybrid? And how do people overcome that? Like, how do you tell them, how do you have them deal with that?
I feel like before I even start there, I should mention how different is to plan a hybrid event in today's reality versus just a few months back, a year ago. And the main difference being this tighter timeline that we all struggle with, which then it's almost like a domino effect, pushing into why the AV costs are higher, why qualified labor costs more, why is it harder to get equipment from point A to point B. And all of it is sort of like tied into a lot of the AV production people that are behind the scenes would love to be involved in those conversations earlier on, would love to be able to provide solutions and come up with creative, you know, ways of doing the event. But if we're just like brought in last minute as, oh, shoot, we do need AV. Oh, who am I going to call now? And can you make it happen? And then we all like struggle, right? Like we all try to make it happen. Obviously, our interest, if I put my name on the line, I want to produce the best event that there is. But I'm also limited by availability of my gear, what other events I'm doing, and where else am I spread, what qualified labor I have available. So all of it is almost like goes hand in hand with, if we could work on our timeline so that it's not so tight, then we can adjust and be more flexible on some of the costs that are involved with a higher budget that a hybrid event would require. And I certainly have one myth that I feel like it has to be mentioned. And again, maybe it goes away from what you're used to, but one that I would like to put up here as a way to just think about it. Hybrid events have to be planned and executed by just the same vendor or the same partner. The truth is, great hybrid events are certainly not an easy fit to execute. And yes, you could bootstrap, like I said, hybrid event by recording your keynote speakers and creating the content that you can, make it available to your audience, either live or on demand. But if you really want to produce a high quality hybrid event, it requires a lot of hands on deck. It requires a lot of partners that you might be working on. Think of a large conference. The general session would have multiple vendors involved to make sure that there's staging, there's rigging, there's lighting, there is audio, there is video production, there is recording. And some of those vendors, they're completely separate from each other, yet together they create the vision for the event. So this is not news for us in the production world, but somehow the clients or the event planners have the expectation that one vendor has to do it all. So we shall only hire one vendor, and this one provider better do a really good job at all aspects of the event. And that's not always the case. Like, be okay with not necessarily looking at your event production as some type of a wholesale approach that maybe I get a better deal if I just have this one vendor do everything. The truth is, if you want quality, you're going to have to rely on multiple vendors to do what they're best at and trust that process. I like this term called co-petition, which is a beautiful thing. It's this abundance mindset that combines competition and cooperation and has the ability to really change the name of the game when it comes to events and business, as long as everyone understands the roadmap of how to get this done properly and not just rely on just one vendor. This is my vendor, and this one vendor might have had no experience in virtual events, yet you expect them to have it, right? So I guess that's the one myth that I just wanted to touch on. And I'm sorry, I'm taking like way too long because I love to talk.
I think it's great. And I think you touched on so many great points, like talking about timeline, right? I think that's what we all struggle with, especially when I wear my meeting planner hat, is I'm trying to get as much together as possible so I can give my vendors or partners as much information as possible so they can plan accordingly. So it's like, but I may not have all those pieces until later. So at what point do I talk to my vendor that I may not have selected yet? Like how, so Chuck, with your experience with that, the timeline issue, like when do you want a customer to come to you, and how does that, what information do you need on the front end? And how do you counsel them through getting to what you need to help them out?
Well, I think everyone in the industry would like more time up front, right? Like, the earlier the better, right? We don't want to be pressed up against a wall and be contacted 3 weeks out from a show. Everything is possible, and we can put things together, and we have a great team that, can accommodate any sort of timeline. But, I feel like a couple months out is a great place to make sure that you have your virtual, your AV, all of your vendors kind of in conversation with one another and talking about your show and having discussions and the information we look for. I know a lot of run of shows are still being edited right up until the final show day, right? But there's tons of other conversations that we can have to make sure that everyone is comfortable and on the same page together before we get to that show day.
What would you say to get the conversation started with you? What are some of the key elements that you want to know as an AV provider?
Date.
Yeah.
And budget would be great.
Yeah, date and location is very important, but what are you looking for in your services? So is it capture, record, stream? Is it going to a platform? Are we going to be putting this show in Zoom? Are we going to be using something like a real-time streaming, like the company that we've been working with recently called Phoenix? It's PHENIX, that does real-time strategy, so that you can do things like game shows, like we've been producing, in real time. So when you have questions that have a counter, right, you can't have any delay. So real-time strategies, things like this of what you want to provide, what services, you need to have those ideas intact. That's a great thing to kick off the conversation, because if you're just looking for recordings, that's one thing, but there's so many other things that we can provide. And, something else earlier that Anka was kind of talking about, though, was about all, the different vendors and everybody doing all this stuff. Well, I do kind of think that here in the age with like what we've been doing, what we've been seeing that has been extremely successful is actually like our company is, doing the virtual, doing the digital, but also doing the AV. And I think it is possible, because I don't like to think of the virtual experience and digital experience being in its own barrel. For us as a company, we did over 300 events last year. And, we all came from AV. We know the traditional side. So many things have changed. I think the technology has become much more efficient, that we can do a lot of these things, that we can do your traditional AV, but we can also do the digital services and, hybrid services, as you will, on top of that, and kind of, provide more from one vendor. Of course, there's going to be other vendors, your rigging, all that stuff like that. You're going to need to go and make sure you secure those. But I do think there's reliability. And I think there's kind of a comfort blanket if you have a company that you work with that can provide all these things together and do a great job. So
I think it's a matter of like the size of the event. Like, for example, when I get involved on large size conferences, I rather focus on the general session. I rather have that general session be the best it can be, create a vision for the client, provide all the bells and whistles. And then if there's breakouts involved, I'm perfectly okay with having the in-house AV take the lead on providing equipment. That doesn't mean that they are going to operate in a silo. I'm still going to be the technical event production contact for all of those elements, but I don't want to have to deal with breakouts and just putting a few screens up for the sake of, making that happen, when I know that the people that are there and the client is invested in the general session more than all the other places, right? So that's why, it's important to have that cooperation going on. And even though, in any other instances, I might be competing with the in-house AV, bringing them in to be my partners for this event. That's what I call competition. That's where I'm okay with, let's work together for the benefit of the event, and you can have your piece. And honestly, I don't even want to deal with that, because I know if you really wanted to fight me on cost on the AV that, the venue provides, you can discount everything to zero just to get your piece of the pie. Why can't we work together to make sure that you get your side and the client gets what they need? And then we're all happy. There's enough for all of us to go around if we operate from an abundance mindset.
I think the biggest commodity here is time, right? And what our comfort level is, especially on the client side for association organizations that are putting on these conferences, is having the time to sit down and think, how do I want this organized? Do I have the time to work with several great partners that I know will collaborate together well? Because that's really key, right? If they don't play, if they're not willing to collaborate, then that's problematic. And
well, that's why you hire an agency that does it all for you, and all you have to wonder about is one person, one point of contact, and you don't have to go and oh God, I need 7 vendors now. You just have one point of contact.
As an association, especially in the association nonprofit space, you may not have the budgetary capability of doing that, right? So it's trying to figure out what is the best match for budget, for capacity, and what your own comfort level is. Because I know as a planner, most of us, and I'm talking from personal experience here, I want to be in control and want to make sure it's, there's a level of quality that's being delivered. So what is the best way I can do that? And that really changes. But we're going to talk more about collaboration in a bit, but we have a couple of questions that I want to ask you all from people out in the audience. So let me see here. The first one we have, this is talking about apps, event apps, especially in the hybrid portion of it. And the question is, when you're really only just recording of sessions and doing the Q&A part of it, this particular individual spent a lot of money on an app, and not quite sure that that was quite necessary. So they like the convenience of being able to log into a platform, but how do you all feel about it? Do you think an event app is absolutely necessary to make that hybrid situation go well?
I don't think it's
My,
necessary. Go
yeah, I
ahead.
don't think, yeah, I think my take on that is if you're planning to do multiple events that you want that history, that audience all to live on that app for a series of events, not just a one-off, it might benefit you to have that, just like you would have your calendar that hosts all your appointments, right? Like I want everything to be on one app versus I have to go in between apps all the time. Do you need it for a hybrid event? No, you don't need an app to be able to stream. There's many other platforms that we stream to, we have streamed to, and there's many other options out there. It's just a matter of like, how do you want to strategize around your event, the reason why you want to have the app in the first place, and what benefits does it give you? And yes, there is the, that ROI that I mentioned earlier, where you might be paying a lot of money for something that you don't even need. If all you need is a Honda to take you to the store, but you're going to pay for a Lamborghini when all you need is like to transfer yourself to the store, was it worth it? I mean, sure, you did travel in style, but really, was it worth it at the end of the day to spend the extra, right? It's a matter of answering that question for your own event and knowing your strategy and the why behind it.
Anka, I'm wondering who you know that drives a Lamborghini that goes to the grocery store, because
I
I'm
have an aunt that does.
I'm imagining not many. I don't see many Lamborghinis in my parking lot.
They might be living somewhere in Southern California. I don't know what's happening with
And Chuck, you were going to say something.
You know, I agree with a lot of what Anka said, and figure out what fits your needs and whatever you go with. If you might be untapping a lot of resources with an app that you're using that you're paying a lot of money for, when something else could have actually been a better fit for you and your budget. We have interaction right here in Zoom with the question and answers in your chat and your polls. That's a form of interaction that we have here built into Zoom. If you want to go outside of that, look up some different options. I know we've had great success with Slido, which is sli.do is the website, and they've been really effective. Make sure you search your options, and there's going to be a lot of people out there trying to sell you, but by now there are plenty of options that might be better tailored for your event and your needs.
Exactly. And for me, one of the resources that I always have some of my clients just go to is Event Mender. They provide a free inventory of platforms that you can review, and you can really like target your needs to whatever your event is, and then you're going to be offered a few choices, a few options. You can go with those options, or you can just find other options, obviously, but at least you know where to start, and like Chuck was saying, if all you need is just Q&A, do you really need an app for Q&A, or can we look at other options?
Anka, can you repeat that website for us again?
Event Mender.
And and just for the
MENDER.
Oh, one more time. Sorry, interrupted you.
MENDER. Event Mender.
And just for the record, Eva did not pay for this, any testimonials.
No, it's a free platform. You can just go and search, research other platforms. I think they have their own arrangements, whatever, on the back end, but as an event planner that's just curious to find out, okay, what would be the best platform for my event, especially when we're talking about enterprise grade platforms. Unless you have all the time in the world to go and do side-by-side demos and comparison of all the, I don't know how many platforms are out there by now, 200 something, then maybe it's better to shortcut some of that research with options that are available now.
And even though I'm in the tech space and we offer an app, I would echo what the both of you said. An event app is not ready. It's not meant for everyone. And you really do have to go and think about what your goals are, what your limitations are, what you're trying to achieve. So thank you for that. We do have another question here. the question is, are there certain days of the week that AV vendors are more expensive? There are slow days for hotels, so I was wondering if the same applies for AV.
I
For
think
us, no.
back, go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll
For us,
let you go
no.
this
I
time.
mean, yeah, yeah, no, every day's the same for us. It's all charged, just by how many days, and that's the total in half days. But there is no difference any day of the week, any time of the month. It's all going to be the same set cost.
I would say the only difference to that is availability. There's definitely days when more events are happening. And if I have booked all my labor and all my gear on a weekend, I might not necessarily be able to do that event. And that's just a matter of accessibility and availability. Now I could have, other vendors, partners to reference or make recommendations for, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna like boost up the cost unless it just happens that you need specific gear that everybody wants. And now we have to transport it from who knows where. And that involves additional costs like freight or, things that are outside of our control as far as what's available locally versus what's available coming from a different warehouse, a different location.
And that kind of goes back to what both of you were talking about with the timeline, right? The sooner that you know things, or even generally knowing, I would much rather tell a partner of mine, hey, this might be coming your way, just so that you can put your eyes on it and radar.
Exactly.
Then you can tell me, you can advise me and tell me, that's going to be really hard to get. You're going to need to commit by X date. And if you really want this to happen.
Yep.
So,
I mean,
great question, Katie.
depending on how busy it is in the area, there's only so many screens and projectors to go around, right? And so the earlier you are, you're going to get dibs on the gear that you want. So
exactly.
Okay, thank you very much for that. With another question here, I knew we'd get a lot of questions from in this session. So
great.
sorry for reading it out loud. I just don't want to get it wrong here. What trends have you seen that incorporate virtual/hybrid events into strictly in-person events to have more engagement for guests? So this seems like it's all about engagement. For example, at our annual gala, which was in person only, we introduced a live social wall driven by guest photos. Oh, that sounds fun. And the one they used was Crowd Purr. That seems like a lot of fun. Have you guys experienced or have any recommendations of that you've seen that's like, wow, this was just a fun event, or a great way to get people engaged?
I feel like we've used the social wall for quite a few years now in virtual events.
Yeah.
That was the go-to engagement. Let's make it fun. Especially in 2020, I produced over 160 virtual events, and that was the go-to. Yay, let's get it done. It's cheap, it's easy. And there's a few other ways to obviously make it happen. The question is, how much budget do you have, and how complicated do you want to get, and what kind of an experience are you looking for, right? So having those conversations, then it creates the roadmap to what are our options that we want to incorporate for our event in this day and age in 2023.
For us, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it was such a big deal for us unveiling it for the first time 2 weeks ago. Was this large game show that we've worked really hard on, which is a huge deal for us. Well, it's because it's custom tailored, and it's not just trivia. And we have a live host, and there's trivia elements in it, but there's also other games that are played. And the name of it, because the event was in Columbus, was Columbus versus the World. So we had contestants that were playing from Columbus versus people that we brought in via Zoom that we put together on the show to represent the world. Meanwhile, everybody in the audience and everyone at home was able to play real time using that Phoenix that I was talking about earlier. They were all playing together at the same time. And it's a quick pace, a lot of different games, really engaging, instead of just asking people to like, hey, let's roll through 20 trivia questions or the kind of stuff that we've seen for a long time. So That for me was really incredible to see it finally have its first, big debut and go flawlessly and be a really great engagement for both virtual and in-person audiences.
I think on the same line, I think one of the funnest I've experienced was and been part of was a live DJ and a host, like basically almost like a karaoke, live karaoke, but then you bring in not just your in-person audience, and you also have duets with your virtual audience. Again, it has to be real time, right? So the platform matters. You can have latency in that, but it's sort of like on the idea of what you just mentioned, Chuck, with that game show. I'm actually excited to learn a little bit more about that. But yeah, this karaoke was so much fun, like air guitars everywhere. Like you can even send, some of the goodie bags to your virtual audience. Hey, look like a rock star, or what do you have around to pretend like you've got an air guitar? It was very entertaining, and it definitely loosened up a lot of, especially if this is your professional crowd, just to be able to be open and ready for whatever content was going to follow after that.
One of the things that I've noticed in the last couple of years is that it really is about the host and who's really engaging them, right? Like you've got to have somebody that's dynamic and knows how to pull in people. We once had a client that did dueling pianos, and they were great about taking in
Love that.
requests and putting people on screen
Yep.
while they were playing. I mean, it was just phenomenal how they could just multitask. They were true entertainers. And I think that made such a difference. It elevated what could just have been, watching pianos play
Yeah.
to making it really interactive. But, I think that's a really interesting part, because that's the entertainment piece, right? That's, but what's needs to support that is what you all do on the AV side. So if someone comes to you and says, I want to do something entertaining and I want to do a game show, what are, it's Chuck, especially since you all are doing this now, what do you advise clients? Like, I have this idea, how do I make it happen? What's your response to that?
Well, bring the idea and then take it to the experts and listen to their advice. Honestly, because we're going to be here to make sure that all of your dreams come to fruition if we can, if they're within the realm of possibility. It's our job to try and create these things, to imagine these things that you've come up with and turn them into a reality. And so, that's some great ideas. And if you're doing dueling pianos, or if you're bringing in a celebrity who's going to be singing, virtually, which probably is much more, cost effective than having them perform live in front of your audience, right? Just make sure that you have a great audio person, AV tech on the other side that's sending the audio through streaming it or putting it on the platform. So
yeah,
I think that's
where the back end vMix operators exist. So we take care of all of that.
Right. And I also think what's important here, because I think sometimes we as planners think so much about the programming that the back end of microphones, camera, those kind of things are things that, we rely on our partners to think of. So some of those basic things in terms of having them, I'm sure you all walk them through that, right? Like, okay, you're going to do this. This is what you need in person, or the speaker needs, or the entertainer. And then on the virtual side, this is what you need.
Absolutely.
How do you control the cost around that? Let's say, this is an organization, they don't want to spend tons of money on bringing like a professional camera, and lighting and all of this. What's the alternative to that? Like, how do you control the costs around that? Because I think that's what we're all struggling with these events. Like, we want to do these amazing things, but we just don't have the budget of a TV production company.
It's true, but there's so many options nowadays. I feel like now that we've been through, like, I don't know how many months it's been, 2.5 years, 3 years of virtual events, getting on the screen, getting in all those Zoom meetings. I have a hard time believing that there's not there's a one person out there that doesn't have a concept of what they need to have on their end as far as camera and mic is concerned to just be able to communicate via Zoom, right? Now, can we elevate that? Absolutely. And that's where we come into place, where we can offer suggestions. If this is something that you'd like to elevate to the next level, here's a few suggestions. We do technical checks all the time for virtual and hybrid events. It's just part of our consultation, part of our program. We don't even have to charge for it. It is in my best interest to make sure that if you're showing up for that virtual event, you're ready to go. If anything, I feel like a lot of event planners fight us back on the need to tech check more than us wanting to do it. We want to do it because guess what? That's a liability to me if I don't know who I'm dealing with. I'd rather spend the time, even if it's coming out of my own time budget, to do all those tech checks and make sure that whoever is show up on the other side, they're ready to go. And as far as, elevating camera and lighting and your microphone to, something that is ready for a hybrid event, there's so many options, and I can go on and on those. Actually, I've written so many blogs about it on my website that at this point I feel like this subject is mute. Like, we've already talked about this so many times. Must we say the same thing again and again? Because we're so far on, like, we're advanced, like, we're talking about the metaverse now. Like, let's move on, people. Let's move into the next stage of what this hybrid event production could look like. We can't just stay in the beginning. We're still figuring out our technology at home.
We have another question here, and this is, let's get it down to basics here. This is the basic essentials that's needed for hosting a hybrid meeting that requires transcription. Let's talk about app versus not app. Like, what's your thoughts on transcription services?
Is this multi-language transcription, or do we have any additional information on what is needed?
Let's talk about both. Let's talk about language and about like closed captioning.
Mm-hmm. I feel like there's multiple ways to go around both of those. I like to use a vendor. I'm gonna have to actually Google their name because I forgot the name. You might have a one that comes on the tip of your tongue, Chuck. Let me find
Well, there's
the one
quite
that I
a
had in
few,
mind.
right? But
There's
Chuck,
quite
in
a few.
terms
It's
of,
just that
like,
I specifically someone that would actually do multi-language. There's not a lot out there, and also having the ability to either do closed captions as a closed captions. Zoom offers closed captions, but ASL interpretation is also another way of like bringing, and a lot of the events that I do actually have ASL interpretation where we have a person that would offer that. And on the back end, we provide the support for it by the programming that we do, the Vimix engineering that happens. I want to look up the app now that I actually feel like I'm fixating on it.
Words that does foreign translation.
I feel like I had a different one.
Yeah. Chuck, in terms of like the physical equipment that you need to do the transcription, is there anything that you need specifically? A special kind of mic, a special kind of app?
No, I mean, not that I would say anything specific. There's tons of options out there, and the mic's not going to really change anything. It's really going to be based on if you want to use the software, if you want to use a person, if you want to use their services. And that's really where it comes in. There's going to be different costs associated with using a person versus using a software. Otter's got a really great transcription service if you're just looking, which can join Zoom camera off and will record everything to a much higher percentage than what you're going to get based just straight out of Zoom. But like, there's so many options and what you're willing to spend, what you want to do. But the hardware is really not going to change anything. Your mics, cables, anything like that.
Yeah. And then
I think the one I was thinking about, it's Universe Language Solutions. I've used that on multiple of my events, and they basically tap into your feed, and you don't have to think about anything. It's like just offering them the ability to tap into whatever your live feed is.
And it's universal. I'm going to put this in the chat. Universal Language Solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there's a few more, like there's so many different ones. And I feel like it comes down to the partnerships that like goes back to that trust, that you were mentioning in the beginning, right? Like, I've worked with this one vendor. They did a great job for me. I'm going to use them again. Why change paths?
Yeah, and each organization also has its own requirements in terms of AI versus a live person. And
Exactly.
I personally don't have a value for one over the other. I think they're both great, but it has to be at the comfort level. Like only I think the client knows their attendees best and can
Hmm.
really kind of um, guide their way on that. Anything else on transcription that you guys want to talk about? I think that was a good question. Thank you. We do have another question here. Keep them coming, guys. Love it. It's
I think it goes to what Chuck said right in the beginning, accessibility.
yeah.
So if that's important to you, you should definitely invest not just the time that it takes to plan for the right vendors, but also the budget that it requires.
I have another question here. This is an interesting one. Is there any aspect to the AV production that you think could be solved better through an event software platform?
Are we
I
talking
see
about
them
in
as two different
person?
worlds.
In person, I have high doubts that's the case.
Yeah, I haven't really seen it yet. It's not to say that it could happen in the future, but right now, definitely would trust on a person
Yeah.
in
What I did see though, what happened
expertise.
during the pandemic, and I think this was out of necessity, right, for companies. A lot of AV companies brought on technology to make up for the gap, right, of not doing
Yeah,
live events. And I think a lot of those companies realize that event tech is a lot more sophisticated. Like it's gone, it's a different ball game now. So I think a lot of them have scaled back to focusing on AV and partnering with event apps. But I think that's kind of where that's gone. But I agree with you guys. I kind of see it in two different roles. All right, we got another question here. Is there a website that has rankings of venues in regards to internet strength and ability for hybrid? That's really interesting. We didn't have hybrid wasn't, I mean, internet and Wi-Fi was not on our list there, but my organization had contracts with hotels and venues made before COVID and before I was hired on. I want to ensure the next place we use has a better setup because you can hire outside AV vendors, but if the venue's internet signal is awful, it makes things harder. What do you
it can
guys
make.
think?
I mean, this is something that's heavily discussed. It's something that is a constant battle, right? And making sure that you have a dedicated line, make sure that you have a dedicated feed that's coming in, and that you triple check it with the house that it is dedicated. It's not tied into another Wi-Fi, and then all of a sudden there's going to be a bunch of people connecting, and then you lose all your signal. It's I wish there was a list that we had of confident internet connections across convention spaces and everything. But really, it's about just making sure that you have the internet speeds, talk to your AV company, what they're asking for, what they're requiring, make sure you get that for them. And yes, of course, you can bring in AV outside, but still the house is going to control the power. They're going to control the internet. So we're still going to have to rely on them for that. But it is a battle. You just got to make sure you check. You got to make sure, like Anka said, you test, and just to make sure that the show is going to go smoothly and you feel better about it.
I've also had the need to actually use a mobile Wi-Fi options for a few different events. One was actually at a venue where we had trouble with getting the venue to negotiate on the Wi-Fi prices. And then because that didn't work out, we brought in our own mobile Wi-Fi support, and we streamed via that. This was a two-way, fully fledged hybrid event. So that was important, 3 days of content and two-way interaction. So that was super important. And the venue, really, they were very unwilling to negotiate, because that was, in many cases, the venue, that's the one thing they have, the upper hand when it comes to infrastructure, right? Like we have the Wi-Fi, you might bring in your own AV provider, whatever, but we got you here, right? So we weren't willing to pay the price, and we had found different options and we made it work. And there's a few different vendors that provide actually mobile AV, mobile Wi-Fi solutions. And we can share that with the audience, Vinu. Can we send them after?
Yeah, absolutely. All
Okay.
the websites and great resources that you all are providing, will definitely share that out with everyone. we're running out of time, but I will share a story later with you all about exactly that, about internet and saving. There are ways around it. Don't let hotels trick you into
Yeah.
saying there's no other option.
Yeah.
But that's another webinar topic. That's actually a great topic that we'll
It
have
is a great topic.
Yeah, for sure,
Um,
for sure.
we have a couple more questions. Oh my goodness. Let's see here. Any other suggestions to not have it just be a stream of the room? Have you seen presenters be repurposed or leveraged further than just showing them on the microphone and slides?
I think presenters can be your best marketing ambassadors if you provide them with the assets to actually promote your event before the event happens. And there's so many ways and so many presenters. I also, fill in the role as a speaker and as an MC for many of the industry events that I partake in. And honestly, it is in my interest to promote that event that by default promotes me. So if you give me the right assets, you better believe it that I will share that with my audience. So involve them in that. Also, make it like a fun, before event, sort of like a red carpet interview where maybe your MC, host, speaker, especially if you paid enough money for that presence to be there, and take testimonials, ask questions, involve them in whatever other gamification type of settings where you leverage their time there and get enough content to be able to have it for the months post-event that are following. I think the best hybrid events that see the most ROI is the ones that leverage the content that has been recorded, but also the speakers, and especially if they're named known speakers that they paid for to be there in the first place.
I wanted to say that because the person was asking, I think, about the traditional side-by-side graphics with speaking ahead, next to it, or the traditional looks that we've seen and everyone's tired of that are just happening now in Zoom. And I highly recommend coming up, getting a designer or working with a team and creating custom looks, custom backgrounds. I know Anka is a really talented vMix operator. What you can do with vMix, what you can do with Wirecast these days, we can make shows look like,
Absolutely.
CNN, ESPN, television broadcast with this technology. Let's create some custom looks. Let's make your show look great. Let's not do traditional black background, speaking as those shows are fine. We can do those too. But if you really want to spruce it up to take it to the next level, create some custom looks with custom backgrounds. And you don't have to have a gigantic camera anymore with an operator to cover every person on your stage. Now we have operators that can control multiple PTZs at the same time, much more cost effective, and we can get some great looking images that we can put together on a custom layout for you that'll really separate your show from a lot of the other conferences that you see.
Absolutely. Sorry, I might have misunderstood the question to that also. We have NDI. We can bring people in from different locations. They don't even have to have some type of extraordinary setup. And I couldn't agree more with what Chuck said. Creativity is just a matter of wanting to get things done differently, and there is no limit to it.
Yeah. So it seems like what I'm taking away from this is not only like the physical surroundings, like the backdrops and whatever that you can provide, but it's also having an operator or partner that really can help you think beyond that, right? Like think, more than just side by side, and offering those up. And great. Well, we're closing up with the time. There is one important topic that I know, Anka, this is very near and dear to your heart, and I am too. I try to raise two powerful feminists in my house, and I think they're overpowering me on that some days. But Anka, you do a lot of work talking about female representation in the AV industry. We don't see a lot of that, and why is that, and what's happening in the industry? Is this something that's changing? I'm loving having you here today representing. That's just it's awesome. But what are you seeing in the industry that's happening? Is there a shift? Are we doing more to support women in AV?
Well, thank you so much for bringing this up. I think it's a very important conversation to be had, could be a topic in itself. I also know that Chuck is a huge ally and supporter of women in AV, and we had a little behind the scenes talk about that. The straight up answer, honestly, to your question is that this lack of representation of women sustains this unjust power relations in decision making. And it's all about visibility, being present in spaces where important decisions are being made and where important things are discussed. And it's about knowing that as a woman, you can hold a position of leadership, position of power. Your work is valued in the same way as the work of man is valued. Your presence matters, and you have equal chances of becoming maybe a lead engineer, a manager, a CEO, or whatever else your ambitious little heart desires. And you have as many opportunities and as fair chances as men have. I'm also a firm believer that people, should be chosen because of their capabilities and qualities, not because of their gender. And I couldn't agree more with that. But unfortunately, the reality sometimes is that after so many years, there's so many industries like the architecture, technology, art, medical science, where the opposite is true, where we conclude that maybe more men get chosen over and over again because it is the gender that we're talking about. And I have obviously a passion for women working behind the scenes in AV productions, and I spend a lot of time on the platforms that I created for myself, empowering, elevating women that would love to have a seat at the table, love to actually learn more, we even have role models to look up to. I actually went through the list of all the role models that I've had growing up myself into this field, and it's 20 years of doing AV productions, and it was all men. I did not have one female role model to look up to and say, I want to be like her. I want to be doing the kind of things that she's doing. Now, all those mentors that I have, male, wonderful mentors, obviously they were supporting me and helping me, but they didn't have certain qualities that a female has. And I mean, we don't have to go into details like how men are different than females, right? But it's just that, like, it's a way of being able to look around the room and say, I see you and you see me. And that visibility goes such a long way. So that's one of the things that, super passionate about. And I'm so happy that you mentioned and you brought that up, Avino.
Well, and Chuck, I know Falcon also does a lot to support women in the industry as well. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. AV industry, tech industry, coding, everything, they all dominated by males. We need to see change, and the industries will benefit more from having more women more in the workforce, and studies have shown that. And I think it's really important, and I want to see that change in the future.
And then, Anka, there are so many great resources, out there that are being developed to help women succeed in this, and in other industries as well. But you have a podcast that talks about this, and you have a season. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. The last season that actually was called season 5 was all about women behind the scenes in events and event productions. And there's about 10 different featured guests that I'd interview from different sides of the event industry. Some were on the technology side, some were on the production side, some were like hands-on, doing things that a lot of men are doing in event productions. And some were more on the, negotiation contract AV production side, where you don't necessarily go and do hands-on work, but you're very much dived into what happens on the negotiation side. So I would suggest, if you wanted to hear some of those stories, we share a lot of resources from each point of view, and you'll see how some of those female actually got to become who they are and what drives them. And let me tell you something, if as a female, you have a passion for this industry, you're going to put up with all the challenges that this industry will bring up. Because let me tell you, it's not easy. There's challenges. But the reason why I'm here 20 years later, when I could have done so many other things and I would have had so many other different opportunities, is because I care, because I want to be here. And there's so many females that want to be here, but sometimes they don't always have that resilience and maybe stubbornness of staying and not figure out other options for themselves, because a lot of times it's circumstantial. Like when I wanted to raise a family, we had to discuss how were we going to make that happen. And even freelancers that are male, and they need to look at parental leave as an option, they don't have that option many times. And they have to figure out how that's going to work for them. So this industry definitely, it's got its benefits, and there's just so much reward coming with a well-executed show, but it's not always easy. And hearing some of those stories, then you can also maybe find yourself in those challenges and maybe find a solution to what you're facing.
No, I appreciate it. You both have given us so much information just from your experiences and tips and everything. I really value that. We're going to throw up your contact slide up on the screen so that people can contact you directly if they want to, because I'm sure there are more questions and more help that is going to be needed out there. But before we leave, love to hear from you very quickly. We only got a minute. About the value of partnership. I really have always looked at my AV vendors as true partners. And for your parting words, I'd love to just kind of hear, in order for that partnership to happen, and we'll start with you, Chuck. What is it that what is it that you cherish the most in that partnership that makes it work?
I think it's really important because what you're going to get when you go to the same vendor to do your shows in different locations, repeat business and forming that relationship, is that you're going to become more comfortable every time you do a show. And I think that's extremely important, especially for you. You've worked all this time planning this show. It's been months. A ton of work has gone into it. And then you don't want to get there and then all of a sudden have a screaming microphone. That's not going to happen if you have, the company that you've worked with before versus, if you're going city to city, dealing with different people every time, different crews every time, that can be a little bit unsettling. So I think it's great to have a partnership, have trust, and really kind of develop that over the course of multiple shows together, and just know that you have the security and you can kind of start focusing on the other things that you as a planner really should be zoning in on as it comes closer to your show day and then as you're kicking off your GS. So I think that's one of the most amazing things about a great partnership is just trust.
Absolutely. And to add to that, everything what Chuck said is, we are OCD people too. We really care. Like when we put our heart and our effort into making this event happen, is because we are your partner. And that's why I stay away from using the word vendor, because vendor just implies that we're there to, get our paycheck or whatever, right? Just cross that off the list and move on to the next thing. A partner is someone that walks you through that event cycle from beginning to end, and they make sure that they execute every element of the pre-event production, the production, and the post-event production. Many times there's many, instances where we have conversation after an event has happened to look at the things that we could do different, better, more engaging for the next event. That's that partner that comes into play because they're invested to make the best of your event, and they're not just there to cross this event off their list. And the clients that I have that consider me a partner, those are the ones that they become my friends. They're not just a client, they're my friends. We actually start exchanging birthday cards and things like, oh my goodness, like, isn't that a little like in the gray personal area? Who cares? We're here because we care about each other, and we want to make sure that you're successful and I'm successful, and we execute this event to the best of our ability for our audience.
Well, I am truly
Well said.
Yes, I agree. I am very appreciative of both of you and that you partnered with me on this webinar. I think great stuff to be shared, and
Can we have some emojis on the screen, like likes, and
we need confetti and fireworks. Can't you guys?
That's right. That's why we need production.
Oh, but this has just been wonderful, and I'm looking forward. I'm hoping we can do this again. And to our guests that have joined us today, thank you for sticking with us and all of the great questions. It really made for a great session today. Now, in terms of your credits, we'll be getting that out to you here in the next couple of days. And then we'll also send you some of the valuable resources that Anka and Chuck have shared with us. So thank you very much. For future webinars, we try to keep these fun, and we've got some good ones coming up. And Gil, if you can throw those up there, we've got quite a few happening in February. We've got one about mobile apps coming up on February 23rd. Another one with, what's the next one, Gil? We've got one coming up with Nexus Marketing. This will be fun with Lee Gimple and Terry Carden, if you've ever heard them speak. The three of us through the industry have become friends, and it should be a fun comedic conversation about networking and engagement. And one more, and this is all about data. If you've heard, I'm your data nerd, your data geek, and love it. And so join me on February 9th for some information. Again, thank you all for joining us. Loved having you. And thank you again, Anka and Chuck. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you.